Hi, Neera Pant would like to welcome you back to the last session of this conference. An important announcement for our participants. Please continue to post your questions on the chat section and we will take them up at the end of the session. Let me welcome the guest of honor right now, Dr. Upasana Gala. Dr. Gala is the founder and CEO of Evolve Brain Training, a neurofeedback-based institute that focuses on using non-invasive brain training techniques to maximize the brain's true potential. Earning a doctorate in neuroscience from the revered Baylor College of Medicine, she has spent over a decade trying to unravel the way neurochemical and neurophysiological changes in the brain affect the way we interact with the world. The passion and curiosity for the subject have led her to make the brain her full-time vocation. Dr. Gala is one of the few women in STEM disciplines in the UAE working on promoting and actioning future-forward technology to help individuals and businesses reassess the way they think and perform. Her goal is to share her teachings, encourage others to tap into and expand their brain's capabilities, and dispel any myths surrounding our most complex organs. Over to you, Dr. Gala.
Thank you so much for that very nice introduction. And I am very excited to talk to you guys about my favorite topic, the brain. And specifically, we're going to talk about ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and new ways to tackle it and non-invasive ways to treat it. So let me just share my presentation. So, what do we think about ADHD? All of us at some point or the other have lost our keys, or we've zoned out while talking to a friend, or walk into a room and forget why we walked in there. So it may feel like, oh, we all experience some kind of ADHD symptoms once in a while. But once in a while is different. What happens in people with ADHD is that these symptoms are so strong and so detrimental that they actually affect the quality of their life in a much more permanent way. And they come in different presentations. So not every ADHD person has the same presentation. Some of them may be inattentive only. So that means, they're unable to be persistent on a particular task. They may get distracted easily, or they tend to zone out, lose interest. And the other is the hyperactive, impulsive kind. So in that you could be fidgety, you can be restless, even excessive talking, or you could have a combination of both. And it is really a growing concern these days. According to the CDC, 11% of children have today been diagnosed with ADHD, and it's rising. In the last 20 years, there's been a 50% rise in ADHD among children, which can also be because of better diagnosis. And it is found to be more common in boys than girls, but recently we know that it may not necessarily be that boys get it more, but that the presentation that boys have can be different than girls and more easier to diagnose. And most of these, children that grow up with ADHD, quarter of them as adults, they continue to have symptoms. Many of them, they are better able to manage it because they have lived with ADHD for so long, but it never really completely goes away. So, and apart from ADHD, people with ADHD, also there's a lot of comorbid disorders. So for example, if you take oppositional defiant disorder, 50% of children with ADHD are also known to have oppositional defiant disorder, or 25% of them have mood dysregulation disorder. And even things like anxiety and depression, they are more common in ADHD people rather than in the general population. So having ADHD can also make you more susceptible to these other disorders. And I feel like there are so many myths these days surrounding ADHD, right? Some people think that, oh, it's just bad behavior, they're not motivated, they're not disciplined, or they don't care enough, or it's because of bad parenting. Or sometimes people think that, oh, if you get good grades, you cannot have ADHD, but that's actually not true. And same with, oh, you're not hyperactive, so I don't think you have ADHD. And the biggest myth of all is that medication is the only way to treat ADHD. All of these things are myths, because ADHD is not a voluntary behavior. It's not because you're not interested or you don't care enough. There's actual structural, neurophysiological, and neurochemical changes in the brains of people with ADHD which is why they have all of these symptoms. And so if you take a look at the brain of an ADHD person, you see that their prefrontal cortex especially is extremely impaired. And this prefrontal cortex is important for a lot of higher executive functions in people. So that's attention, planning, self-control, all of the inhibitory controls. And if you look at brain imaging studies, you see that the prefrontal cortex of people with ADHD is actually decreased in volume. So it's even smaller. And not only that, it also has decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex. And if you look at SPECT scans, you see that they have decreased blood flow to the prefrontal region as well, especially in the right frontal area. And there's also some other areas like the basal ganglia and thalamus that are reduced in activation. So if you look at this, so this is an fMRI study. So on the top is a neurotypical brain. So I don't like to use the word normal because there is no such thing as a normal brain. So I use neurotypical, which is more common because it's a more typical type of the brain that we see in the population. And then there's neurodivergent brains, one of which is an ADHD brain. So at the top is the neurotypical brain, and at the bottom is the ADHD brain. And you can see there is reduced activation here in the inhibition networks. So if you look at the bottom, there's not that much activation. And also there's reduced activation in the basal ganglia. So we know that their prefrontal cortex is highly impaired. And because of that, they have a lot of dysfunction in their core executive functions. So what are some of the core executive functions that the prefrontal cortex is responsible for? One of them is the inhibition functions. So this inhibits your impulses. So your core immediate urge. So if somebody cuts you off in traffic, what stops you from immediately like honking the horn or blurting out something inappropriate? It's because your inhibition network goes into play and stops you from doing that. And this inhibition function is also important to ignore distractions. So if you are a neurotypical person and you're listening to somebody give a talk and someone next to you drops a pencil, you're able to just ignore that distraction and focus on the person that you're supposed to be listening to. Whereas for an ADHD brain, it just becomes impossible to ignore that. Their brain will make them want to look at the pencil, see what the other person did with it, and then maybe come back and then look out the window and come back again. It's because they're unable to inhibit this urge to look at other distractions. Then we have issues with working memory. So working memory is the ability of your brain to hold temporary information. And it is different from short-term memory in the sense that you don't just have to hold the information, but you actually have to extract the right stuff out from that information and use it to manipulate the next step of the task. So when you have a multi-step task to do, you need to have good working memory so you're doing the right thing in order. And the other issue people with dysfunction in the executive functions have is problems with cognitive flexibility. The cognitive flexibility is important for problem solving and having a different perspective. So people with dysfunction in this area have a difficult time breaking out of their patterns. And also to think of things from another person's perspective, they find it really hard. We'll go a little bit into detail about each of these. So inhibitory functions, how can it present in people? I already mentioned about the distractibility. It's not easy to ignore distractions, but it can also cause anger and other mood issues. Because again, it is your immediate reaction or overreaction. And if you don't have the inhibitory control to help you with it, you're going to have some kind of mood disorders or mood dysregulation, including issues. And it can also cause discipline problems. So if your boss is telling you to do something or your teacher is telling you to do something and you just don't want to do it and you can't think ahead and you can't think of the consequences. And so it comes out as a discipline problem, but it's actually a problem with inhibitory control. And working memory. So working memory, as I mentioned, you need to be able to hold information and then use it for other things. So it's really important for mental math. So even if you want to do simple addition and subtraction, you need to be able to remember the carryover to use it to come up with your answer. And that's why people with ADHD have trouble with mental math because of issues with working memory. And also a lot of forgetfulness kind of issues, especially with like a multi-step or multi-list. So for example, if you tell an ADHD person, you have to go to the market and bring eggs and bread and milk, they'll go to the market, they'll spend 2 hours there and come back with like peanut butter and jelly and totally forget about the eggs and the milk. That's because of issues with working memory. And again, because of these kind of issues, it can affect your grades or your professional performance in life. And problems with cognitive flexibility. So cognitive flexibility helps to break patterns, like I mentioned. And if you notice, that also is important for switching tasks. So if you look at some ADHD people, when they are really focused on something, it's something they're really enjoying or really into it, you can yell and scream in their face and they will still not even pay attention to you. And that can sometimes also stop you from thinking outside the box because you become so set in your ways. And it can also affect interpersonal issues. Because imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you're just unable to think of things from their perspective or put yourself in their shoes, then you're going to have a lot of interpersonal issues because you're unable to break that pattern that you are set with. And it's not easy for you to think differently. So that's why people with ADHD can have issues with all of these problems because of the core executive dysfunction. And all these core executive functions, so working memory, inhibition control, as well as cognitive flexibility, they're all very interdependent and linked. So you need working memory in order to have good inhibition control, because you need to know what you need to have a plan in mind to know what information is relevant and what needs to be ignored. So, and similarly, you need good inhibition for working memory, because if you need to remember something or focus on something, you need to be able to ignore the internal and external distractions to be able to achieve that goal. So both of these need to be working together and helping each other. And both of these together are important for cognitive flexibility. So if you want to change a certain task or start a new routine, you need to be able to remember the previous task in your working memory, so you know what to manipulate. And then you need to be able to inhibit your urge to continue doing the old thing and be able to be flexible. So all these three executive functions together are responsible for reasoning, problem solving, and planning, which is why people with ADHD often have trouble with this. So they have a really difficult time planning ahead. So if they know they have an exam tomorrow, but they're playing a video game right now, it's really hard for them to not continue playing the video game because they cannot think of what happens when tomorrow comes. It's going to be a problem, and their brain just cannot comprehend that because it's not happening right away, and it's difficult for them to plan ahead. So essentially, ADHD is like having a Ferrari for an engine. So you have all these amazing ideas, great energy, lot of stuff going on, but then you have bicycle brakes. So you're just going to crash and burn. But if you have the right tools and you can understand what's going on in your ADHD brain and you can help manage it, then you can come out as a winner. So how can we help these ADHD things? So first of all, to understand what's happening in an ADHD brain, we want to know how people diagnose ADHD today's ways to do that. So one of the most common things is the behavior checklist, which is the Conners rating scale. It is a simple evaluation method. It's a bunch of questionnaire, and then you ask either the teacher fills it or the parent fills it or the self if they are an adult. But the limitation with this is that the symptoms can be subjective. So it also causes issues with studies, because it's hard to know what you think is inattentive if that's the same what the other person thinks. So it's difficult to have an objective view of that. The other assessment is continuous performance test. This test measures your sustained attention, measures your impulse control, as well as your response speed. So it helps to understand a lot of information about the executive functioning. But the limitations with that is there are some issues with the validity of tests and the standardization. It's still not a bad test though. Then there is the DSM-5, so the checklist that is in the DSM-5, which is really good because it standardizes all the diagnosis and treatment. However, there's a wide array of symptoms in checklists. So there is a big risk of misdiagnosis or overdiagnosis if you go by this big array of lists. But lately we have brain mapping technology, QEEG, which is really cool because it helps identify specific areas of the brain and the brain waves that are not functioning optimally. I think it's a really cool technology, but the limitation of that is that it is new-ish, so it isn't used as much. But once it is used more widespread, we will have better controls and better standards, and I think it will be a game changer. So the rest of the talk, I am going to talk about the electrophysiology of ADHD and how we can use EEG to both assess as well as treat ADHD. So just to understand briefly, what are the different electrical activities in the brain? What are the different kinds of brain waves? So we have the delta brain waves, which have the frequency band of 1 to 4 hertz, which means they make a cycle 1 to 4 times within a second. they're the slowest brain waves. It's when you are sleeping or drowsy, you're going to have a high delta activity in your brain. Then we have the theta brain waves, which is from 4 to 8 hertz. And the theta brain waves is often like the brain wave between conscious and unconscious. So if you're, driving down a normal route and you zone out, daydreaming, that's when your brain is in theta state. The alpha state is 8 to 13 hertz. It's the more relaxed awareness. So if you're just relaxing at the beach, or you just finished making a presentation and now you're sitting down, that's when your brain is in alpha state. And then you have the beta state, which is your alert, awake, conscious state. It's 13 hertz to around 30, and then you have high beta from 30 to 40. So right now, you and I, we're all in beta state, hopefully, if nobody is in theta and zoning out. So these are the beta brain state is generally what your most common brain state would be whenever you're doing something actively and consciously. So now that we understand the different brain waves, let's see what happens. What does an ADHD person's QEEG map looks like? So here is a neurotypical brain, which is normalized. So the 0 is that's the normal levels of the different brainwave activities, the entire QEEG map from 1 to 60 hertz. And then this is the ADHD brain. You can clearly see there's a lot of dysregulation. Some areas in the front, especially highly more activity, in the bottom less activity, and overall doesn't look exactly like this brain. So this is the total QEEG, but now we split it up into the different brain waves, the delta, theta, alpha, and beta, and see the difference between the neurotypical and the ADHD brain. So two things that I specifically want you to look at is the theta. So the colors range from blue is the lowest and red is the highest. So you can see here, in the normal brain, there is much more theta activity because it's closer to green in the prefrontal cortex rather than the neurotypical brain. So you can see they have extreme high levels of theta in the prefrontal cortex. And if you look at beta, there is much lower beta because there's much more blue here, whereas it's more purple over here. So there's much less beta in the ADHD brain compared to the neurotypical brain. So what we see is they have the more theta, but less beta. And brain mapping, so now that we know that there's such a typical presentation of all these different brain waves, it would be interesting to know if we can use brain mapping as a diagnostic purpose, because you get a lot of information from QEEG. You get to see the amplitude, the frequency, as well as the relationship between different areas of the cortex that we're looking at. And it also helps you quantify the amount and distribution and ratio of the various brain waves. So not just how much theta there is, how much beta there is, but also the ratios, the theta to beta ratio, the SMR ratio, all this kind of stuff. And what that helps with, so because not every ADHD person will have the same amount of theta or the same amount of low beta. So it helps you give more specific information about each ADHD brain. And because we get such specific information about each ADHD brain, we can come up with specific solutions for that ADHD brain. And the best thing about it is that it is a completely non-invasive reading of the brain activity. So you don't even have to go into a machine, you don't have to ingest anything, none of that. You just attach the sensors on the head and it's painless and non-invasive. And it's already being used for a lot of different, there's already a lot of different typical presentations for other disorders like depression, anxiety, migraine. So it's a really cool way to diagnose ADHD and maybe a little bit more objective rather than the subjective behavior checklist. So what do they see when they look at the different ADHD symptoms? What happens in the brain waves? So if you look at the people with distractibility issues, their brain mapping shows abnormalities in the beta and high beta frequency. So generally they show reduced beta and reduced high beta. Then if you look at the people with hyperactivity and impulsivity disorders, symptoms, then you see for them low SMR activity. So SMR is the sensory motor rhythm in the sensory motor cortex. And then people with a combined ADHD, you see both unusually high theta in the front, so in the frontal cortex, and higher theta than beta activity. So not only do they have a lot of theta, too little beta, but their theta to beta ratio is really high because of this. So can we use the same EEG technology to treat it now that we know that we can use it to diagnose it? So one way we can do that is using EEG neurofeedback. So how does EEG neurofeedback work? So So neurofeedback means feedback for the brain. So an analogy that I often use, imagine you're walking in front of a mirror, but your hair is messed up. Now, when you look in the mirror, you get that information about your hair being messed up, so you fix it, right? So that is exactly what we do with the brain. We show the brain its own activity in real time, and when the brain sees what it's doing wrong, it can essentially self-correct and self-regulate. Because our brains have a self-regulating mechanism, but only if they know what they're doing wrong. So the way it works is that we hook up a person to EEG sensors. We extract information about the brain activity, and we translate that information onto a screen that they're watching and give them immediate audio and visual feedback that helps them change their brainwave patterns. So how would this work for an ADHD person? So you have an ADHD person here, they're hooked up to the sensors, and every time their brain does something desired, which in this case is focus better. So every time their brain focuses, the video output they're watching, the screen becomes full screen, it will be clear, and the sound will be good. But if they get distracted or bored or get restless, then the screen will start getting smaller, blurrier, and sound will get more muffled. Now, the big screen and the good sound, they are a positive reward for the brain here. The brain likes it. So then the brain does more of that desired activity. And then it gets more positive reward. And so it does more. So that's how it gets into this loop. The more it focuses, the more reward it gets, which makes it want to focus more. And then eventually, when you do this kind of training several times, then this new way of being more focused becomes the brain's natural new habit. It's based on the principle of operant conditioning. So then even when they stop doing the sessions, 6 months later, a year later, this becomes a new brainwave pattern and they find it easy to focus, regardless of whether they do more sessions or not. So what are the commonly used protocols for ADHD? There are 3 main. The theta-beta training, which, because as we know, ADHD people have more theta, less beta. So theta-beta training, essentially what they're doing is you are reducing their theta activity and increasing their beta. For SMR training, it's between the 12 to 15 hertz, and people with ADHD have low SMR activity. So low SMR activity means less inhibition of motor activities. So less inhibition means more restless, more hyperactive, more fidgety. And SCP regulation, these are very slow brain waves, less than 1 hertz. And what happens in ADHD people is that they have dysregulated SCP. So it's not like they have more, so SCP is low cortical potential. And it doesn't mean that they have more or low, it's more about there is dysregulation of slow cortical potentials. And so how do we do the theta-beta training? So we do it in the central and frontal region. As I mentioned, ADHD people have high theta than beta. So the training goal, decrease theta, increase beta. And the expected result is to have the ADHD people be more alert and more focused while still being relaxed. So they're not hyperactive, but they're alert and focused and not zoning out. And then the other is the SMR activity. Since ADHD people have reduced SMR, the training goal is to increase the power of SMR, and the expected result is to see a reduction in the hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms. So here is a fairly recent study from 2015 where they look at, where they do a 2-phase study. So in the first phase, they do 15 sessions of SMR training and decreasing theta. And then for phase 2, they do 15 more sessions where they decrease theta as well as increase beta. And then they look at 3 things, the inattention, the hyperactivity and impulsivity, and then the combined scores. And you can see after phase 1, there's a significant decrease in the inattention, and then a little further decrease after phase 2. And for hyperactivity and impulsivity, there's a greater decrease from phase 2. But combined overall, you can see that there's significant improvement in both attention and hyperactivity and impulsivity with this combined SMR and theta-beta training protocol. Then the next is the slow cortical potential training, which is the other common way to treat people with ADHD. And SCPs are based on electrical activity in the brain, usually really low ones. They're very, very slow brain waves. Sorry, that's my clock. So the SCPs go from surface negative to surface positive, and they're event related, so they have to be generated, and they happen over the sensory motor cortex. So what happens in a negative SCP? It reflects increased excitation, And the negative shift allows for increased attention and initiation of goal-directed behavior. So you have a goal you want to achieve, and then you plan all your actions around it to achieve that goal. The positive shift, it indicates reduction of cortical excitation, and it happens when resources are consumed to perform the task. And what happens in an ADHD brain is that their brain has less of that negative shift. So they don't have that attention and energy to follow a goal and do it. Their SCP gets kind of stuck in the positive shift. So with the SCP training, what we're trying to do is improve the regulation of slow cortical potential excitability. And the expected result is to have increased attention and initiation of goal-directed behavior. So, oops. Okay, here's the one. So this is a very recent meta-analysis from 2020 of all the commonly used protocols for ADHD training. And they look at the efficacy score. So the efficacy score of 0.4 to 0.6 is considered medium efficacy, and 0.6 and above is considered high efficacy. And this is the SCP training, so slow cortical potential. And you can see it already has a very high efficacy. The gray is after finishing the training of either 20 or 30 sessions. It's different for all of them because it's a meta-analysis. And the black is a follow-up after 6 months of no more training. So they've already finished their sessions, and then for 6 months, they don't do any training, and then they see the efficacy. And you can see that the results sustain. And then this is a combined SCP as well as TBR training. Already, again, a very high efficacy at the end of training, and then it sustains. For TBR, there's a medium efficacy at the end of training. But interestingly, you see that at a follow-up, without any more sessions, they somehow strengthened their efficacy. So they actually the brains got better because they had that training, even though they were not doing any more sessions. And finally, SMR, you can see that it was a medium efficacy at the end of training, and at the follow-up, it sustained as well. So these are all the different protocols that are used so far. There is another new, this is fairly new, it's just maybe like a decade or so of infra-low frequency training. So these are even slower than the slow cortical potential. So less than 0.5 and even less than 0.1 hertz. In fact, even less than like 0.1 millihertz. So they involve training the very slowest of brain waves. And the computer settings encourage and reward specific components of the EEG in this very slow brainwave region. And in fact, infra-low frequency is what I do in my center. And infra-low frequency is one of the very few EEG training where you can actually see changes in session. So within the session, you can see people be more focused or more relaxed. And even though we're training the very, very slow brain waves, you see a change in all the other brain frequencies. So in the theta and the alpha and the beta, all of these are also changed when we work on the infra-low frequency. And the best thing about it is that clients can see it immediately during session, or within 1 or 2 sessions, you start seeing the changes. So this is data from my own center, and we've taken information from 35 clients, male and female mix. And this is based on their own self-reporting of their symptoms. And the symptoms we use were distractibility, poor concentration, poor sustained attention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And the orange is after 10 sessions, so halfway through their training, and the gray is after 20 sessions. And you can see there's 40 to 50% reduction for both male and female and overall total. And then we also use continuous performance test to measure their inattention and impulsivity scores. And again, you can see more than a 50% reduction in the inattention score, as well as in the impulsivity score. So they're making fewer omission errors and fewer commission errors, which are indicative of attention and impulsivity, respectively. So I already went through this. And as I mentioned, the long-term effects. So here, if you look at the red and the black is what we're comparing. The red is the sham neurofeedback, and the black is the neurofeedback group. And this is post, so after the training, and then this is the follow-up 6 to 12 months after they finish training. And you can see continued sustained effects. This is inattention, this is impulsivity, again, sustained results, and then this is hyperactivity. And then there are many other ways, the people also do something called cognitive training for ADHD. So this graph is comparing neurofeedback to control as well as cognitive training. The black line is neurofeedback. The dashed is the cognitive training. So you can see compared to cognitive training, the neurofeedback have a much greater increase in the effects. So better efficacy. And after a 6-month follow-up, you still continue to see those results. And similarly, this is the this is inattention and this is impulsivity. And you can see that the neurofeedback has a reduction in the impulsivity, and 6-month follow-up, you continue to see those effects. So the long-term effects of EEG are really great, and it shows that you don't have to continue training the person. So what are currently the common solutions people use for treatment outside of neurofeedback? So the number one treatment that any psychiatrist or anyone will give you right now is medications, pharmacological solutions. And these are either stimulants like methylphenidate or amphetamines, or non-stimulants like atomoxetine. And the way they work is that they increase, for the stimulants, they increase the dopamine and norepinephrine. So dopamine is your reward molecule. It seeks and searches for reward and then motivates you to go to the action required to get that, to achieve that reward. And people with the ADHD are known to have decreased levels of dopamine. That's why, sometimes for neurotypical people, just the reward of completing a task is enough to motivate us to finish a task. Whereas for people with ADHD, just completing a task doesn't give them enough of that dopamine hit. But if they're doing something they really enjoy, like playing a video game, they can do it for hours because that achieves their threshold of dopamine. But for regular tasks, they don't have enough dopamine. So that's why these stimulants target those. And the norepinephrine is the molecule that allows you to focus on the task at hand without getting distracted. And then the non-stimulant, it inhibits the reuptake of norepinephrine. So once norepinephrine has been released in the synaptic cleft, it will let it stay there and not uptake it. So it allows ADHD people to be able to focus for longer. So these medications are great, but medications are like glasses. So if you have bad eyesight and you wear glasses, yes, you will be able to see and read while you're wearing the glasses. But as soon as you take off the glasses, you won't be able to read again, because these glasses are not fixing your eyesight. They're only making it possible for you to read while you're wearing them. And the same thing happens with medications. They're not a long-term solution. They're not fixing or curing your ADHD. They're just allowing you to manage the symptoms. And as soon as you get off the medication, after a few months, your brain will go back to the basal levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, and you will again continue to have those symptoms. On top of that, there's other negative side effects like sleep trouble, reduced appetite, especially in adolescence. There's a lot of irritability, also changes with blood pressure and heart rate. So there's a lot of negative side effects. But while you're taking the medication, they really work. They really help you with your attention and impulsivity issues. So does neurofeedback compare to the results of medications? That is an important question, right? Because if they do, then we can do something that is less invasive than medications. So here you see a study from 2013 where they compare children that are on methylphenidate and children that are going through neurofeedback. So the dashed line is methylphenidate and the dark blue is the neurofeedback. And you can see there is really no difference between the children that are on, and this is the ADHD total score. So pre-treatment, post-treatment, a 2-month follow-up, and a 6-month follow-up. And they continue to have similar results. The 6-month follow-up for the medication, they continue to take the medication. But for neurofeedback, they don't do the neurofeedback anymore. So we see similar results, but without having to ingest anything, without any invasiveness, without any of the negative side effects of medication. So neurofeedback is a safer option, more non-invasive, no medication is involved, and it treats the issue at its core. So it's giving you a long-term solution. It's not just a Band-Aid. It's not just a pair of glasses that fixes it for a while. It is a long-term solution. And it uses your brain's natural ability to regulate itself. It's not some outside thing that is causing changes. It's just your brain has the ability to self-regulate. You just need to let it know what it's doing wrong. So apart from neurofeedback, neurofeedback is a great non-invasive way if pharmacological medications don't suit you or you don't want to be on them. But apart from that, if you really understand what is going on in your ADHD brain, there are other changes you can make in your lifestyle and micro hacks you can use in your daily life to help you with these issues as well. And regardless of whether you're taking medications or doing any counseling or doing neurofeedback, it's always a good idea to supplement it with changes in your lifestyle and making micro hacks. So what kind of micro hacks can we do? So we know the three main issues people with people with ADHD have is problems with inhibitory control. We talked about that. So how can you in your daily life help your brain with inhibitory control? Number one thing, removing temptation. So if there is something you're trying to do, if you're trying to lose weight and you're trying to not eat fatty foods, rid your house of fatty foods. It's a simple technique that we all use, but it is especially important for people with ADHD because they have such little inhibitory controls. So add some friction towards the things that you don't want to do. Add a little barrier towards it that makes it less likely for you to be tempted. And build self-discipline, but do this in like a small way. So don't have super intimidating or overwhelming goals like I'm going to finish my dissertation in 2 days. That's not going to happen. So set clear goals and be kind to yourself and really use the because planning is not one of the forte of people with ADHD. It's really important that you keep this in mind and put your plan to paper. What can you do for inattention? So have a dedicated space, whether it's a dedicated workspace or school space. If you know your brain is prone to getting distracted easily, remove everything unnecessary from your workspace. Only have the things you're going to need. And use timers. So timers for working as well as timers for break. Don't use your phone because there's a bunch of distractions on your phone. So buy an actual physical timer that you can set. So you set a timer for 1 hour, and then that 1 hour you focus and finish your work and don't take any breaks. And then you set a timer for 15 minutes, and that's your time to take a break. And as soon as you hear the ding, you go back to work. So it's a great way to buy these focus timers. They're really cheap, but it's a really great tool to help people with ADHD using timers in your daily life. And also eliminate distractions. I'm going to especially talk about this one because it's something that I struggle with myself. The amount of time we spend on our phones and screens these days. We don't even the first thing that you do, wake up in the morning, you look at your phone. The last thing that you do before you go to sleep is look at your phone. We cannot wait in line for coffee without looking at our phone, or we cannot wait for our friend to show up for dinner without looking at our phone. It's, our love affair with this phone screen is really a problem. So one of the things that you can do, very easy micro hack, is to put all of your time sucking apps, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, put them inside a folder and then put that folder on screen 3. So don't put it on your homepage. So anytime you have a few seconds of nothing to do, you're not immediately going to Instagram or immediately going to TikTok. It adds a little bit of friction to that and helps to eliminate distractions. So very easy thing. As soon as we finish this talk, I want all of you guys to go do this one task. Honestly, it will make a big difference in your life. Then what can you do for hyperactivity? So physical exercise. Physical exercise is a great way to get rid of that excess energy in people with ADHD. Not only that, physical exercise has a lot of other benefits for your brain. It increases the level of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine in your brain. And we already know dopamine is important for motivation, norepinephrine is important for focus, and serotonin is important for mood regulation. Because a lot of people with ADHD also have mood dysregulation issues. So they suddenly become really upset or really hyper or really emotional, and having good amounts of serotonin helps them with that. So having added benefit of motivation, focus, as well as mood regulation and being happier, you will also be able to get rid of the hyperactivity a little bit. So add, you don't need much. Even 20 minutes a day is enough, but the consistency is what is important. Use fidget spinners. So the fidget spinners are actually made for people with ADHD to help them get rid of this excess energy. And, you can, even while you're doing that, you can focus on something because it rids you of the need to do something else. So it's an easy way to eliminate distraction. And other thing, don't forget to take rest. Because people with ADHD really put so much on their plate. They have a hard time saying no to everything, this and that, and all these other things. And then they forget to take rest and downtime, and it can really affect their overall mood and mental health. So don't forget to take rest. Put rest on your calendar. Put it as a thing that you need to do. And for working memory, Working memory, as I mentioned, is what's important to hold, information in mind for multi-step things. Because it's difficult for people with ADHD, it's really good idea to break your goal into mini goals so that you don't forget a specific step. And reduce multitasking, which is very tempting for people with ADHD because they want to do everything. They want to do this and that, everything at the same time. But it really is counterproductive. So you can have multiple tasks set up, but use that focus timer to allow you to give 1 hour on dedicated time to one task and then another, maybe 20 minutes to another task or 30 minutes to another task. But when you're doing one task, really be dedicated to that task and use checklists because you are going to forget something. That's just how an ADHD brain is. So using checklists is a great way to help your brain with the working memory issue. And that's all that I have. If we are unable to answer any of your questions now, you can follow me at Evolve Brain Training and ask me more questions. And
thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to take up the questions one by one. Did you have any information about QEEG mapping being done in India?
I am not sure. I know that they do it in the, I don't know actually, but I know that you can, I don't know if they do QEEG mapping, but they definitely do the EEG training. So maybe some of those centers might also have QEEG mapping. It's actually very expensive right now. That's another limitation to that. The QEEG mapping is really expensive. And I think especially in India, that might be the reason that they're not doing it more frequently. But if you find an EEG training center and ask them, they might have it, but they may not want to advertise it because it costs them a lot of money as well.
Yeah. Okay. The next question. Can QEEG mapping be done on autistic people?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be done on anyone who can sit still for 10 minutes. We can do it for them. So we've even done it for children, 3 years old, 5 years old. We can do it for anyone.
All right. This is a related question. Can people have both autism and ADHD? And if so, in this case, would the protocols for this treatment be the same?
No, the protocols will be different. In fact, yes, and a person can have both autism and ADHD and other comorbid disorders as well. But that's the thing about neurofeedback protocols. They are different for everybody. So even for 10 different people with ADHD symptoms, there will be a different protocol for all of them. And that's actually one of the problems because it's hard to do really good studies. Because if you look at pharmacological studies, they give everybody the same dosage, right? And then that is like the control and the standardized treatment. But for neurofeedback, there is no such thing as a standardized treatment. And that's why it's been really hard to get like good research published because no two people are going to have the same training protocol. And then it's hard to talk about the differences between the different protocols. But the results are there. It's just hard to put it in like a neat package with a bow. But yeah, it would be different protocol.
Okay. Does a prolonged exposure to these waves have adverse effects on the people?
You're not exposing yourself to any waves. So the sensors are only measuring your brain waves. So you know how we have the ECG? It's just measuring your heart rate. That's exactly what the EEG is doing. It's measuring your brain wave. It's not putting any information into your brain. It is not putting any waves or any magnetic or any radiation or anything inside your brain. It's only measuring. So there is nothing, it's completely non-invasive.
Okay. Does ADHD affect the IQ, and do these people have high IQ, the ADHD people?
No, it's not. There's no real correlation to ADHD and IQ. There are some ADHD people with a very high IQ. They're really smart. They're really good at managing the symptoms and doing. And then there are some people that are not. It's just like the general population. There's no correlation between ADHD and IQ.
Okay. Does mindfulness meditation work by altering brain waves in the ADHD patients or by increasing control over inhibitory mechanisms?
Both.
Okay.
So when you meditate, your brain is, so meditation is more the alpha and theta state. And the more you meditate, the more you increase your alpha levels and the theta levels. But also meditation, what it does is it strengthens your prefrontal cortex. And strengthening prefrontal cortex means strengthening your inhibitory networks. So if your if your amygdala is sending you into fight or flight mode, the prefrontal cortex needs to tell the amygdala, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to wait. We're going to make rational decisions. And regular mindfulness meditation allows you to have a stronger prefrontal cortex, so it gets better at making decisions. And at the same time, it also changes your brain waves.
Okay.
I think somebody's
There's some disturbance. Please mute yourselves.
okay.
Okay. Does frequent snapping of hands or arms indicate ADHD in children, in kids actually, not in younger kids?
Yes, it can be, but it can also be autistic stimming. So you need to look at other things, what the kid is doing, to know if it's an ADHD issue or some other issue. But yes, they can also have that presentation.
Okay. So there's a similar question. I have observed some people having habits of shaking their legs while talking during social interactions or interviews. Does this indicate some lack of control? How to control this? Is it nervousness or ADHD? Or, is it related to ADHD basically?
I cannot know unless I do a consultation with them. It could be nervousness, it could be restlessness, it could be general physical restlessness that they have because of ADHD, or only because of hyperactivity, or only nervous situations they become that way, and it's coming out. This is a presentation of that. There's no way to tell just from like never meeting the person and talking to them and looking at their brain.
Right. I do have a question for you. I just wanted to, with the present pandemic that we are having right now, how is it impacting people with ADHD?
I feel like, because you have to do a lot of things online, right? And it's really hard. It's really hard for people with ADHD. Even a lot of the kids that come to me, even for adults or even for people that don't have ADHD, it's hard to stay focused in an online thing, right? So yes, these kids are really struggling, and even adults who have to do a lot of meetings online. There's so many distractions online. So the whole online situation is really, really, I think, exacerbating the symptoms of ADHD. And then they're spending so much screen time, and all of everything that goes along with it. It affects their sleep quality, affects everything. And worse sleep makes ADHD symptoms worse as well.
Okay. All right. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, when you said you are using those, the non-invasive treatment, at the studies that you say the treatment goes on for 6 months and you've mapped them after a year. How long is that sustained? Do you have a longitudinal study kind of a thing?
So the longest one that I've done is 6 to 12 months. I personally don't have my own, but one of the studies that I presented, they have a 12-month follow-up in that. Like the randomized,
yeah. So that's the longest.
Yeah, that's the longest. 1 year is the longest that I have seen. I don't know, but I'm keeping my own notes, and I will follow up with my clients. And actually, most of my clients, they never really stop. So even after they finish their 20 sessions or 30 sessions or whatever they need, they then get on like a maintenance program. So they do like 1 session a month, or they do 1 session whenever they feel like they need something. Because it's essentially like going to the gym. It's a brain gym, and so there is no risk of overtraining or anything like that, because you can always improve. You can always have better focus. You can always have better motivation. So I myself have done more than 100 sessions on myself, because why should I not do it, right? So there is no harm in continuing to do more sessions, but it's not necessary. But you can continue to see more and more progress if you continue to do more sessions.
All right. So this was probably the last question that I take. It says, are there any ways we can help children with both ADHD and autism during these difficult times? Any specific activities you could suggest?
So, activities, you mean like
something that they could do to handle this pandemic, maybe the stress of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of like little, I like playing this game about, so you do this alternative because of cognitive flexibility. It helps with cognitive flexibility. So you pick up a pen and then you come up with 10 different uses for this pen. So apart from using it for writing, what else can I use it for? I can use it for playing drums. I can use it to tie my hair. I can use it to mix something, whatever. And it allows the brain to have like more synaptic connections, because it's thinking more, being more creative, using the right side of the brain, improving the abstract thinking. So it's a really cool exercise, and you can do it with lots of different objects in your house. And it's a good game to play with kids as well. And it helps improve their cognitive flexibility.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Gala, for those invaluable inputs about the brain and with the focus on ADHD. Thank you for elaborating on the neurophysiology and neurochemistry of the disease. It was indeed fascinating to learn about this revolutionary medication-free neurofeedback therapy, as well as the daily microhacks that you just told us to do. You've given us amazing insights about neurofeedback, and I'm sure it has motivated a large number of participants to try this non-invasive way of addressing stress-related issues. Of course, like you did say, it is expensive, so we hope it can become more accessible to most of us. Thank you again so much. It was indeed very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and you were all great audience with really nice questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatt.
Professor Rooplal is the NASI Senior Scientist Platinum Jubilee Fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute, New Delhi. He is the Fellow of the Indian National Science Academy, Fellow of National Academy of Sciences, Fellow of National Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and the Fellow of the Academy of Microbiological Sciences, India. He started his career as a lecturer in Sri Venkateshwara College, University of Delhi, and served for nearly 13 years and became a professor of molecular biology at the Department of Zoology, University of Delhi, from where he superannuated in 2018. He has over 40 years of long-standing experience in teaching, administration, and research. Professor Rooplal specializes himself in the area of microbial diversity, genomics, and metagenomics. He has extensively explored the molecular and genetic aspects of hexachlorocyclohexane degradation, explored microbial diversity, and carried out comparative genomic and metagenomic analysis. Professor Rooplal was also the editor-in-chief of the Indian Journal of Microbiology from 2006 to 2013 and is also serving as a member of the editorial board in various leading scientific journals like the M Systems, Environmental Microbiology, BMC Biotechnology, and many more. He has over 200 publications in peer-reviewed journals with 7,082 ISI citations and an H index of 42. Professor Lal is also the recipient of several prestigious fellowships, including the Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship, Germany, DBT Overseas Fellowship, and the Indo-US ASM Professorship in Microbiology. Amongst his numerous accolades, it is imperative to mention that he is the recipient of the Endeavour Executive Fellowship and the Moselio Schechter Distinguished Service Award from the American Society for Microbiology. Before Professor Rooplal commences his talk, I would like to remind the participants to post their queries in the chat box and they'll be answered shortly after the talk ends. Here's to you, Professor Lal.
Welcome, sir.
Are you able to see my?
Yes, sir. Sir, not the slides yet. Now they're visible. Yes, now they're visible.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting a wonderful conference where you all have already listened to many scientific and elaborate lectures on neuro disorders and also how to maintain good health. In fact, as mentioned, I really could not really prepare myself to deliver this specific and more scientific lecture on this particular topic, human gut microbiome and mental health. But then I also did not want to opportunity to tell my colleagues and those who are organizing and the young audience to give them a simple message. Before you get into all these diseases, probably there is also a method that you can maintain a good health actually prior to getting the signal that your health is getting deteriorated. So I'm talking on a very important topic that is gut microbiome and mental health or health as such, not only the mental health, but overall health of the individual and what are the undercurrents where this biological sciences are heading to and where exactly now you all need to understand and lay more focus on. So this particular topic which I'm talking about, that is microbiome, probably a few years before or during the early 2010, or probably we did not know much about the microbial world. But with the coming up of sequencing technologies and all computational biology, now you know that our perception of microbial world has completely changed. We know that their contribution and their presence is immense and infinite. We actually, if you look into the newer figures, the number of microbes that are present on this particular planet is something around 0.9 to 3.2 into 10 to the power 30. Now, this includes microbes from all environments, extreme environments, then also saline, soil, water, plant, and animal. Now, when I'm talking about microbes, I'm talking about archaea, bacteria, algae, fungi, and also viruses. Probably you are not, you will not be believe and will not know that on this particular planet the number of viruses is something around 1 to the power 30, and the total 30% of the living biomass is constituted by microbes. That brings a new question to our mind. Can you really do biology, good actually science, whether it is dealing with plants or animals, without understanding the role of these microorganisms, which constitute around 30% of the total living biomass on this particular earth? I think the answer to this particular question is no. And now everybody, almost those who are working with plant system, the animal system, and also in other disciplines in biochemistry and several other disciplines of biological and chemical sciences, they have understood that without understanding the role of organisms, without understanding the role of association of microorganisms with any system, be it plant or animals, or be it the uh, 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 neural disorders, we cannot resolve number of issues that we encounter today. And when I'm talking about microbiological world, probably earlier, as I mentioned, we only used to look into simple organism, picking up an organism or couple of organisms from a particular environment, culturing them in a medium, and then looking into it what exactly these organisms are doing. But with the advent of newer sequencing technologies and also coming up of the computational tools, as I have mentioned earlier, we are not only dealing with single organism, but we are dealing with the community of organisms in a particular environment. And that community of organisms that includes microbes, genes, proteins, genomes in a particular dynamic environment, we call it as microbiome. So I'm not talking about the single organisms, but I'm talking about what this microorganism mean and what does this mean to human beings, and how exactly we can maintain a good health by understanding the role of microorganisms or microbiomes that are associated with us. Now, this, as I already mentioned, that all this has happened. When I'm talking about that 30% of the total living biomass is constituted by microorganisms. Now, this information did not come simply by culturing these organisms, but it came from sequencing technologies and by using computational tools. So all these in silico studies, they reflected there are so many organisms, there are so many bacteria on this particular planet, there are so many viruses, and there are so many archaea, algae, and fungi. As a result of with the coming up this information, now many major projects world over were initiated. Now you all know it that human microbiome project was initiated sometime in 2008. The first phase of this particular project was completed in 2012. Earth Microbiome Project, American Gut Microbiome Project. There are a large number of projects that have been initiated in order to understand. When we came to know that 30% of the living biomass is constituted by microorganisms, lot more major projects on microbiome to understand their role and their interactions with the living systems were initiated. So I'll just mention, actually, you all know it. And you need to know it very well in order to maintain good health. That is the human microbiome. What is that information came in? And there are a lot more information that is coming on almost on daily basis. You all know it that when we are born, we are 100% we have our own genes. But with the immediately after birth, when we come in association with microorganisms, 90% of our genome, it comes from microbes. So that would mean we are only performing 10% of the function. 90% of the functions are being performed by the organisms, by the microbe, or by the microbiome that is getting associated with us immediately afterwards. And probably now, of course, this figure which I have mentioned, it keeps on changing. But we know more or less that human beings, they contain 30 trillion of cells, and there are nearly 30,000 genes that are in human genome. But with the coming up of these microorganisms, when microbes get associated immediately after our birth, the number of genes, it goes up to 3 million. And the total number of bacteria that gets associated with us is something around 39 trillion. Now, these, they are neither parasite nor, they're very beneficial to us. I mentioned number of platforms. How many? We nearly, each one of us is carrying around more than 3 pounds of this microbial load, and major amount of microorganisms that is present in our gut. Now, these 2% of the human body weight is constituted by bacteria, and 60% of the stool, dry matter, is constituted by. Now, that's what I said, that these estimates, with the coming up of newer techniques and new computational tools, these more precise information is being provided now. So human cells something around 10 to the power 13, microbial cells 10 to the power 14, bacteriophages in our gut or in our body something around 10 to the power 12 per gram of fecal matter. So that is the size does not matter, but this is the number that matters, and the number of bacteria. Now, probably earlier we were, and doctors, everybody used to consider human system in isolation. But when I'm saying that we have so many 39 trillion of bacteria that are associated with us, that means can you really understand physiology of human system by only understanding the functions that our own cells they perform? I think no. So we are actually a consortium of bacteria, and we work in association with, or the bacteria work in association with the human cells, and the total actually interactions decides what type of individuals we should be, which type of disease should be there, should we be normal, should we be healthy, and so on and so forth. You will be surprised to know that the major or maximum amount of these bacterial cells which are present, they are in our gut, are in the colon, something around 10 to the power 14 CFU per ml or per gram of fecal matter. That is in our gut. So my gut is in fact it's something which controls major functions, and all these functions, in fact, most of these bacteria, they provide gut immunity and also responsible for immunomodulation. And as a result of that, large number of that is all other diseases or healthy individuals, that is decided by the type of microbes that exist in my gut. And any imbalance or shift in the bacterial population in my gut, it leads to large number of diseases. Probably list is very long. Here you probably, this is a very old slide where I have only mentioned 13. But all disorders, obesity, malnutrition, diabetes, then arthritis, blood pressure, then neural diseases, mental health, depression, brain functioning, all these diseases, in fact, they are not because of my cells are becoming getting abnormal, but it is primarily the association, the bacterial population that decides actually whether I should be a normal person or a healthy person, or all sort of diseases should happen in my body. So this is what I want to emphasize, that we not only understood actually what are the types of microbes or how many microbes are present in my body, but we also actually today know what are the type of phyla that are present, what are the types of bacteria that are present in normal individuals, and also in the individuals that are suffering from mental disorders, that are suffering from depression, that are suffering from psychological disorders, cancer, then heart diseases, and so on and so forth. So probably this practice it has come in. Doctors really need to understand or need to tell actually or consider when they are actually dealing with the patients the role of these microorganisms in order to deal with the large number of diseases. As I mentioned, that after having understood how many microbes are associated with on present on my skin, in my nasal cavity, in my gut, and on my body. Now we know, and as I mentioned, that probably it is the gut actually that contains large number of bacteria which are playing very important role in order to maintain human health. And we not only know the number, we not only know the amount of these bacteria that are present in my body, we also know what are the types of bacteria they are present in a particular system, and what is they are doing, what type of chemicals these bacteria they are producing. And they can eventually, these chemicals, they can resist cell death. They can also actually regulate the proliferating signals. They can avoid immune destruction. They can also avoid make our genome stable. They can activate and metastasis and so on. Also, you name any disease now, eventually it's percolating to the presence of microbiota and microorganisms and the type of chemicals they are producing in my gut. So this all has been identified now after having understood that there are so many bacteria in the human intestine to maintain good health. Believe it, you need to understand, human need to maintain a very good bacterial biota or microbiota in your gut. And that this is something which we did one study actually in order to understand the distance. Now your microbiome, it changes. Of course, initially the microbiome bacteria that gets associated with you, the presence and type of microorganisms that are present in my gut, on my skin, in my nasal cavity, is being decided by the environment, the type of food, the dietary habits, the exercise, and my lifestyle. So, in one of the studies that we carried out here, in individuals who were suffering from, along with Dr. Yogender Singh, who were suffering from tuberculosis, we took the fecal samples from the patients who were suffering from tuberculosis and also the family members who were nearly normal. We considered them as a control. And then we analyzed their gut microbiome. And also we looked into the microbiome changes, gut microbiome in those individuals or in those TB patients who were given the antibiotics. Now, what we normally wait a minute. Yes. So what we actually eventually came to the conclusion that those diseased individuals suffering from tuberculosis, now a bacterial population, it changes drastically. And the population that comes in are responsible for the production of short chain fatty acids, propionate, butyrate, and all these actually chemicals, they have already been reported to impair the immunity, alter the appetite, and that has been reported from TB patients. So the point that I wanted to bring out here is that yes, any change in the gut microbiota lead to the change in the production of chemicals, and then uh, once that happens, now it lead to the if, if these chemicals are produced in my gut, are they linked with my brain? How these two, that is gut microbiome and my brain, they work together. Now, in fact, the human gut microbiome is also called as a second brain or virtual endocrine organ. And the composition of the second brain affects the first brain. That is what we call it as the gut brain nexus. And as you can see in the next slide, now, as I mentioned, that we know now today what are the chemicals that are being produced in my gut by the bacteria. And these chemicals then they actually get diffused into my blood through the blood vessels. They get through the microbes prompt neuropod cells in the gut lining to stimulate the vagus nerve that connects the gut directly with the brain. Then the endocrine cells gets activated. My immune cells and inflammation system gets affected. So all this actually happens. It begins from my gut. They reduce anxiety, increase sensitivity to pain. Then there are a large number of, whether you are in depression or you have psychological disorders or you are more prone to cancer or you have a heart attack. This all is being decided by the type of bacteria and the type of chemicals that are produced in my gut. And then, as you can see from this, as I mentioned, that there is a very close association between the brain and the gut. And then, because there are large number of bacteria that we have understood now in my gut, they produce large number of chemicals. So brain and the second brain or the gut microbiome, they work in association and decide actually whether a particular individual should be healthy or there should be any disease or it should eventually lead to. So this all again, eventually I will come to a point that this all depends upon your lifestyle and dietary habits. So if you really, so it's a bi-directional this thing association. Now, why do you actually, of course, I will link it actually, the association of gut and brain in general with the human health, but also because the emphasis of this particular conference is on mental health. So this probably leads to dysbiosis, which you call it, the actually disorder in the gut, uh, in my gut, alteration in the microbial community can lead to large number of mental disorders. And you know that there are more than 1 billion of world population that is reported to suffer from emotional, psychological, and neurological imbalances. Then about in India itself, there are more than 197 million people who suffer from all these diseases or disorders. So it's very good, very essential now to understand the gut microbiota, the type of chemical that are being produced, and then relate them to the nexus that is being reported I mean, you can see actually scientists have already understood and analyzed the gut microbiota of that is autism, then also the deficient that is hyperactivity disorders, the depression, number of psychorders, then Alzheimer disease, and it is also known what are the type of organisms or what are the changes that have happened in the gut, and as a result of that, the individuals they continue suffering. So this probably you can be before actually you get into any disease. It is always better you understand and maintain your. I have done it actually a couple of years to maintain good health and good microbiota. You can change your lifestyle. You can change your dietary habits. You start eating actually whatever you have been eating earlier. Please stop eating that. You stop eating chapatis and rice. There are a lot more other things that are available. And fool your actually bacteria that are present in the gut, which probably have started producing chemicals. And those chemicals eventually will give signals to the brain in order to lead to all those diseases which probably have been discussed during the 2 days of this particular conference. So you know it actually, dopamine and adrenaline, which are actually feel good factors actually. We know what are the types of bacteria. If those bacteria are missing, then unnecessarily you get into depression. It varies actually. If somebody fails in exam, actually the fellow will be he will not be depressed. But if somebody who has actually less amount of these chemicals, the feel good factor, और आपको दूसरे दिन अखबार में लगेगा कि उसने पंखे से अपनी जान दे दी है. So this is not basically because of the his or her fault, but it is basically because of the type of microbiota that already existed in the individual's gut, and that led to the depression and large number of these disorders, including mental disorders. So the factors that affect, there are a large number, but you can change. Even the aging, anything. I'm telling you, actually, taking antibiotics. The many people they continue taking antibiotic. When I'm talking about that, there are 10 to the power 14 bacteria per gram of fecal matter in my intestine. That would mean that when you take antibiotic, you certainly actually disturb the population. There will be some bacteria which will tolerate and will dominate, the others will not. But then to maintain good actually bacteria, you read the literature, search the Google. You will find out that people now they have stopped taking antibiotics and they have simply changed their lifestyle, doing exercises and leading a very healthy life by changing dietary habits. I myself have done it. I was something around 97 to how much some 5 or 7 years before, but now my weight is 67. Simply because I just realized actually in the year 2012, then when first paper in Nature on human microbiome and its relationship with obesity and large number of diseases was published. Then I realized that probably it is not my fault. I eat more because my bacteria, they compel me to eat more. They want actually samosa, gulab jamun and jalebi. But once I started fooling them and started eating different of food and then also doing exercises. But yes, this you need to be actually you need to have a very good willpower. Everybody cannot do it. It's not easy to change the lifestyle. हर रोज आपको खुशबू आएगी समोसे की और जलेबियों की. So that probably it becomes very difficult actually when you start actually shifting from the type of the normal food with आपको लगेगा कि पता नहीं चपाती और चावल नहीं खाए तो पता नहीं क्या हो गया. But that happens only for a few days. But after some time, then you really hate eating chapatis, and also you hate eating other type of stuff that you had been eating during your life. And now there are large number of therapies that are coming up. Of course, these will be. You just wait for a couple of years. The fecal microbiota transplantation and use of antibiotics to selectively use them to bring out a population that makes certain type of chemicals that can actually restore the health of the individual. Special nutrient diets and a combination. It's not the individual organism will work, but it will be a combination of it is what scientists are contemplating that just giving probiotics, a single individual or single microbes will not work. It will be a combination, and these technologies are already almost in the market. Perhaps you will be surprised to know that there are large number of companies that are already in, which are collecting the this fecal matter or from the individuals, and they are paying everybody actually around $50 per sample if they have healthy microbiomes and preserving it for future in order to do the transplantation. So that is the type of, and believe it, I do not have time and really didn't have time to bring together all that information which actually I wanted to convey. But the only thing I wanted, the message I want that microbiome is very important. You can lead a very good and healthy life. You can age, you can increase your number of years, you can live for many years if you realize that which type of microbiome should be there and what type of exercises and lifestyle and dietary habits you should adopt in order to lead it. Now, because it is very important, so now every year 27th of June is celebrated as a World Microbiome Day in order to not only to propagate this particular, give this message to the scientists who are working in this particular discipline, but to instigate and also to tell the scientists to convey this message to the society and also to the children. I will come to this point, something that has not been done in our country and also world over. We neglected actually जो वो प्लांट से ही काम करते रहे. जो एनिमल वाले थे वो कहते थे एनिमल ही सब कुछ है, बैक्टीरिया तो कुछ नहीं है. When I had been working with microorganisms in zoology department, I was criticized कि ये कहाँ से आ गया. Zoology में तो बड़े-बड़े एनिमल से हाथी और घोड़ों से काम करना चाहिए. And this fellow is working with the, but now you have understood. With the coming up of this COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, probably our society and children, they did not know, and probably many of us did not know कि इतना छोटा सा वायरस जिसका साइज 70 to 90 वो पूरी दुनिया को बंद कर सकता है. So my actually request to all of you would be that we have microbiology and microorganisms. We never try to understand to the extent to which we should have understood them. हम बच्चों को जब ये पढ़ाते थे कि A for apple and E for elephant, C for cat. अब समय आ गया है जब हम बच्चों को ये पढ़ाना है A for arthobacter, B for bacillus, E for E. coli and C for corona and V for virus. So be very clear. I'm not really kidding but telling you very clearly. ये अब हमें पता लगा कि हमें you know when I'm speaking there are around 30 million microorganisms around me. When I'm even shaking, अब कहा ना कि हाथ नहीं मिलाना है. For this, the simple reason is that even handshake actually you transfer 124 million of bacteria, and even actually उससे कम कैसे हो जाते हैं? Simple, so that probably you have read it in the newspapers कि भाई अगर बैक्टीरिया से या पैथोजन से बचना है. So there is a need of microbiology literacy in society if you want to lead a healthy. हम बोलते हैं ना कि भाई जब थोड़ा 65 के साल या 70 साल का बोलते हैं 70 बतरा हो गया, मैंने उसका गट का माइक्रोबायोम चेंज हो गया, भूलना शुरू कर दिया, नाम भूलना शुरू हो गए. So ये basically not because of it's not my fault, but because my biota or my microbiome also got changed with the course of time. So if you can maintain a healthy micro, you can maintain good health. So there is a need, urgent need for microbiology literacy in the society. We all need to tell our children. We need to tell our society the role of microorganisms and microbiome. We have written a common, some 40 scientists along with we were also a part. Actually the microbiome and bacteria to human health and mental disorders. So it's a very good article that has not only been written for scientists, but it is also for the society and also for the children. ये जो मैंने पहले बताया कि SARS CoV-2 और COVID-19 कितना साइज है इसका? 17 to 19 that is nanometer. और ये छोटा सा वायरस ने क्या क्या कर दिया है? कंप्लीट वर्ल्ड इज लॉकडाउन. कितना नुकसान हो गया है. लेकिन जब ये सब कुछ लॉकडाउन हुआ तो रिक्शा वाले को नहीं समझ आ रहा है ये क्यों हुआ, ये वायरस क्या है. तो हम साइंटिस्ट ने कभी ये इनिशिएटिव नहीं लिया कि हम सोसाइटी में जाके बच्चों को बताएं, अपने समाज को बताएं और ये सभी को बताएं कि भाई yes, microbiology is very important. And even we compel our administrators, we compel our politicians to make them to understand the role of microbiology and also to make it a part of the political system so that we are ready to face all sort of situations if this type of calamities they come in. And we are in fact organizing annual conference of Association of Microbiologists, where we will lay emphasis on microbiology and human health and on microbiome. It is sometime in February 3 to 5 on 2021. But then the message I wanted to convey through this particular lecture, I could not, I'm sorry, really could not put all those slides together because of some problem that came up yesterday in my family. But I wanted to certainly to be there on the request of Jasvinda that I want to convey this message to all those scientists and all those who are listening to my lecture that please propagate microbiology in society. And in those who are actually my colleagues, उनके पेरेंट्स अगर वो रिटायर हो गए तो उनको बोल देना है कि एंटीबायोटिक जो फ्री में मिल रहा है ना उनको मत खाओ. Actually try to understand and maintain healthy microbiome in order to maintain a good health. And I want and request you all to be my ambassadors from today onward to propagate this particular message that microbiology is very important, not only to maintain good health, not only actually to be very healthy, but also to maintain the entire world free from diseases and also from pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rooplal, for your wonderful lecture. It is indeed intriguing for us to know that gut bacteria has such an essential role in regulating so many aspects of our mental well-being and well-being in general. Thank you. We would now take a few questions from our lovely audience. So, sir, here's the first question from the audience. How can we permanently replace our gut microbiota or customize it?
I have permanently replaced it. I told you sometime in 2013, I was around more than 90 kg, and I used to use for 4 chapatis for lunch, 6 chapatis for dinner, 10 chapatis, a total 20 chapatis. So then anything that was, my wife used to say कि अब बच्ची इसको खा लो, सुबह भी तो खराब ही होना है. So in fact she of course very loving wife, but she used my gut as a dustbin. तो बच जाना है तो क्या मैंने अपनी गट में ही डालना है, उसी से थ्रू होना ही है. तो आपने जो खा रहे हो, ये समोसे खा रहे हो, गुलाब जामुन खा रहे हो, जो आप खा रहे हो एक चेंज कर दो, दूसरा अपना ये लाइफस्टाइल चेंज कर दो. डू एक्सरसाइज. I walk from almost 15 kilometers. I do exercise on elliptical. I something around 20 to 25 kilometers, 2.5 hours. Spend some 4 to 5 hours, and then I reduce my weight to some 67 to 68 kg. I'm so healthy now. मेरा जो सब कुछ मुझे इतना हेल्दी मैं कभी फील नहीं करता था. मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि छलांग लगा दूं मैं हवा में अब. So that means I have completely now changed my microbiota. I've stopped taking now chapati and this thing, rice. Almost take 1 chapati a day, but then eat rest of the things. But eat only once. I take little breakfast, do not take dinner. But how to do that? Probably it will be what suits you. But what I'm saying that you start changing your lifestyle and dietary habit. वो जो खा रहे हो मत खाओ. हर बार के जैसे घर में ही होता है, बहुत अच्छा बना हुआ है भाई खा ही लो, सुबह फेंकना है क्यों रखना है. परमानेंटली चेंज हो जाएगा. मैंने किया हुआ है, मुझे देख लेना आप, मैंने वो स्लाइडें नहीं दिखाई.
Thank you for the answer, sir. Our participants find it inspirational. So the next question that we have is, how can dietary alterations affect our gut microbiome, and what food enhances good microbiomes to have good mental health?
Right. You know, when it comes to mental, there is already, you search in Google, already written what is the normal microbiota that maintains good health. But to keep that, how do you want to, you said actually, what was the first question, first part of it?
The first part was, sir, that how can dietary alterations affect our gut microbiome? And the second part was that what foods enhance good microbes to have good mental health?
Right. So, so what already actually, you know, because depends upon if I stay near to Kamla Nagar, तो मुझे ये जो छोले भटूरे खाने का, गुलाब जामुन और ये खाने का, so that changes. तो जो बैक्टीरिया आ जाते, क्योंकि जो मैं खा रहा हूँ, तो बैक्टीरिया भी उसी तरह के आ जाएंगे ना. वो फिर हमेशा मुझे कहेंगे कि भाई अब गुलाब जामुन नहीं चाहिए. So that means you bring a balance, reduce intake, reduce fat. Already known that firmicutes, they are actually carbohydrate fat loving, and bodies they are carbohydrate loving. एक का पॉपुलेशन अगर ज्यादा हो गया, that makes you fatty. अगर दूसरों का ज्यादा है तो that makes you lean. तो आप ज्यादा कार्ब भी बहुत ज्यादा नहीं खाने हैं जो आप हमारा, क्योंकि हम हमेशा ही क्या खाते रहते हैं, ये चावल, और हमारा कार्बोहाइड्रेट इंटेक बहुत ज्यादा है. उसका इतना ज्यादा जरूरत नहीं है और इतना खाने की जरूरत नहीं है. जो बदमाश बैक्टीरिया है उनको तड़फ तड़फ के अपने आप ही मरने दो. यू डोंट नीड टू ईट फॉर देम. मैं पहले उन्हीं के लिए खाता था और अपने घर वाले और बच्चों कह देते थे पापा खत्म कर दो. तो अब मैंने ये सोच लिया, ना मैं बैक्टीरिया के लिए खाऊंगा, ना जो मेरा घर में कहते हैं कि वेस्ट होगा उनके लिए खाऊंगा। तो माई बायोटा ऑलमोस्ट कितने सालों, 2-3 सालों से मैं कार्ब अब बहुत कम खाता हूँ। एक चपाती खाता हूँ, मेरा मन भी नहीं करता, क्योंकि अब बैक्टीरिया नहीं है मेरे अंदर वैसे। क्या?
So there is another related question from a participant, and it says that if we'll reduce the number of chapati and the frequency of eating, would it not affect our other physiological needs and lead to weakness? How could we manage that then?
भाई बाकी तो सब अपना कितना कैलोरी चाहिए आपको, 2000 चाहिए ना, तो मैं 20 चपाती खा लेता, एक चपाती में 150 ग्राम है, तो मैं 3000 तो मैं चपाती से ही खा लिया, फिर चावल भी खा लेने, फिर राजमा भी खा लेने, तो मैं उतना बर्न किया। आई नॉट बर्न दैट मच, वो सारा मेरा गट में नहीं, मेरी बॉडी में एक्यूमुलेट होगा फिर जो बाकी है। वीकनेस आपको पता लग जाता है जब आप छोड़ते हो ना। यू नीड 2000, आप फ्रूट खा लो, आपको और सलाद है, बहुत चीजें हैं, बट इट टेक्स टाइम एंड डिटर्मिनेशन। हम इतना करना, कहना आसान है, करना बहुत लोगों ने ट्राई किया, 3-4 दिन करके छोड़ दिया उन्होंने, जो रूपलाल की तरह करें, पर नहीं कर पाए। इट नीड्स ए डिटर्मिनेशन, इट टेक्स लॉट ऑफ टाइम। आपको आपका बॉडी एडिक्ट होता है, वो विड्रॉल सिम्टम्स होते हैं जब आप रोज गुलाब जामुन और जलेबी खा रहे हो, जब छोड़ते हो तो एकदम आपका मन करता है कि चाहे मैं मर जाऊं, अब तो मैं खा ही लूंगा। तो वो 10, 15, 20 दिन खराब होते हैं, उसके बाद तो आप कहते हो कि अब तो मैंने खाना ही नहीं है, बिकॉज दूसरी पॉपुलेशन बैक्टीरिया की आ जाती है, विच इज गुड फॉर यू।
Sir, we have the last question for today. Although the participants are asking for sharing your diet plan with them, but the last question that we'll take for today is, what are your thoughts on veganism? Is that overall a better choice? Veganism, sir, is that overall a better choice? The participants want to know.
देखो, मेरे हिसाब से अगर आप कम खाओ तो मेरी बेटर चॉइस है। आप जो भी खाना है कुछ खाते रहो। पहले तो ये कैलकुलेट कर लो, अगर 2000 चाहिए तो 2000 से 3000 नहीं खानी है, तभी खानी है एबल टू। मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ आप जो भी खाना है खाओ, लेकिन ना मैं अपनी डाइट भी शेयर कर लेता हूँ। सुबह में 1 गिलास दूध का पीता हूँ और 3 सेब खाता हूँ, और कोई एक फल खा लिया, चाय पी लेता हूँ जितनी भी मन, और 2 चपाती शाम को खाता हूँ, और जो घर में बनता है वही खाता हूँ, मैं सेपरेट नहीं बनवाता। पर चपाती मैंने लिमिट कर दिया है, अगर चावल लूंगा तो चपाती नहीं लूंगा, ये मेरी डाइट है। बट अगर आप मेटाबॉलिज्म बहुत हाई है तो थोड़ा आप और खा लो, लेकिन ये कैलकुलेट कर लो आपको कितना चाहिए, उतना ही, जितना इससे ज्यादा आपको बर्न भी करना है। सो आई बर्न नियरली 2500 है, तो उसमें से मैं काफी अपना फैट भी तो मैं रिड्यूस कर रहा हूँ, तो मैं बर्न भी करता हूँ। अब मैं 21,000 स्टेप्स रोज का डेली करता हूँ। मैंने पहनी हुई है, पता नहीं आप देखोगे, ये एप्पल वॉच है, ये रखी हुई है मैंने, ये मैं 21,000 स्टेप्स 15 किलोमीटर, एंड दैट आई कंप्लीट बाय डूइंग लॉट मोर वॉकिंग एंड एक्सरसाइजेज। अपने पेरेंट्स को ये बता दो, एंटीबायोटिक मत लो, मैंने सारी छोड़ दी है। मेरा ब्लड प्रेशर, डॉक्टर ने कहा था कि भाई अब जो है वो नहीं है, मैं अब पता है 2 साल से मैं ब्लड प्रेशर की दवाई ले ही नहीं रहा हूँ। मेरा ब्लड प्रेशर 75/125 है। So that is the type of situation that and health I'm maintaining today. वैसे आप of course should not boast, ये पता नहीं होता क्या हो जाना है, but then actually your lifestyle and dietary habits can really keep you healthy. Something which normally I missed for a number of years.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for showing us the light. It seems like we just understood once again that the gut microbiota is us. I'm sure our takeaway from this lecture would be to at least try eat healthy, like you said, and take care of what nature has already given us. I thank you, sir, on behalf of everyone for sparing your precious time and enlightening us with your talk today. I am sure that all of us have learned from your lecture, your patience and virtues. Thank you so much.
you very much. Thank you, Jaswinder, Poonam, and Udita. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much, sir. Thank you. That was very inspiring.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone, all the participants, for being with us on this journey of NeuroEunoia 2020. It means a lot to us to have had all the speakers, the team members, and our wonderful audience with us. This conference has been what we dared imagine it to be. It was a basket full of knowledge shared by our eminent speakers and their perseverance in answering so many queries. Thank you so much, everyone. This conference would not have been possible without all of you. Summarizing the aim and intent of the conference once more, according to the 2015 NMHS report, 1 in every 20 people in India are suffering from depression. Generally speaking, it is critical that the current youth be aware of various mental health related aspects. This is essential for both the individual well-being and the society. Sleep and mental disorders usually occur at a similar time, and untreated sleep disorders later in life might increase the chances of developing psychiatric conditions such as depression. It is also important that the students realize the importance of sleep, which is the most compromised in the current scenario. Depression, anxiety, drug abuse are the most common mental health problems that are related to sleep complaints. Neurodegenerative disorders remain one of the biggest mental health problem challenges. Some rather age-dependent disorders are growing nowadays as the elderly population has recently risen as a result of tremendous developments in medical facilities. It is therefore important that the youth become interested in pursuing neuroscience research. This kind of change needs to be consciously promoted and supported. All of these and the adjunct issues have been thoroughly covered by our learned speakers, starting right from the idea of becoming a super ager, followed by inheritance patterns of dyslexia, to the molecular and synaptic mechanism of memory formation, really must have boggled all our minds. The further talks sensitized us about understanding the neurophysiological aspect of the children suffering from ADHD, and finally, there was some insightful explanation on brain plasticity. What we started out as a minuscule effort towards understanding the vast field of neuroscience has borne some fruit, to say the least, and I'm sure that the talks today have infused us with greater interest towards the subject and our mental well-being. It has indeed been a stepping stone towards a more inclusive society. Before we move on, I would like to congratulate our convener, Dr. Jaswinder Kaur, for creating something so beautiful and taking us along on this journey of NeuroEunoia 2020. Now, I would like to mention to the participants that it is imperative for all of you to fill out the feedback forms, and the certificates would be received by you in the coming 15 days. We all appreciate your patience. We will now go ahead and release the abstract book for NeuroEunoia 2020. We sincerely pray and hope that you all like it. I hope my screen is visible to everybody.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, so that's our abstract book, which we are very proud to present. So we have tried to include everything in the abstract book, right from the inception of the conference to the team of organizers, to messages from various speakers, the program, and walk through all of the talks. This abstract book also includes the abstracts for all the posters that were sent in by the participants. And we'll be sharing this abstract book on the conference website. So we'll just go through it. So for all of us who have not seen our college, that's our Gargi College, and we are all very proud to be a part of it. I would once again like to thank all the advisors who had been on this journey with us. We thank you wholeheartedly, everyone. Many, many thanks to our guests of honor, Professor Ruplal and Professor Pravat Mandal once more. We would once again would like to thank Ustad Sabir Khan ji, the great Sarangi maestro who played for us today morning. We indeed feel ourselves very lucky to have had him play for us today. So all of you would be able to see small gists of all the talks by all the speakers, and this section would be followed by your abstracts that you had sent us for your posters. We thank you once again for showing such unprecedented interest. Thank you. I would now like to hand over the mic to Dr. Jaswinder Kaur.
Sure. Am I audible?
Yes, Jaswinder, you are.
Good evening, everyone. The miracle of your mind isn't that you can see the world as it is. It's that you can see the world as it isn't. To start with saying the least, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude to each one of you who chose to be with us on this journey of facilitating NeuroEunoia. Words of gratitude won't suffice for our eminent speakers who took out their precious time and presented their talks. We could only dream of having you with us, and it is only you who could make it see the light of day. We pray that you all keep well and keep shining your knowledge onto the world. I'm immensely grateful to our principal, Dr. Prabila Kumar, respected Chairman, Professor Rehan Khan Suri, and our amazing chief guest, Dr. Sanjay Pratap Singh, for their steadfast support. I'm equally grateful to the entire organizing team for being a part of this journey, Mr. Anuj and Mr. Om Prakash for technical assistance, and last but not the least, to all the lovely participants without whom this virtual conference would not have been a success. Special thanks to the Indian Academy of Neurosciences for sponsoring all the cash prizes, and to all our lovely judges, Dr. Neera Pant, Dr. Arun Sasidharan, Dr. Suman Jain, and Dr. Ella Varsi. This conference was a minuscule attempt to actively facilitate and foster the kind of transformation that leads us all to new doors. A healthy mind is imperative for a healthy society and vice versa. I pray to the Almighty that we all keep well and retain at least some of what we have learned in this virtual conference. We will take your leave now with a promise to meet you all again very soon. Stay tuned for a short video.